Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today I'm going to offer up some impressions on Lords of Heaven by Phalanx. Now this is a game where you control, it's a 2 to 4 player game where you control various factions vying for control of Jerusalem and the surrounding areas in the first 2 historical Crusades. Now, a couple of caveats here. One, I wouldn't call this a review because I haven't been able to play it for quite that length of time that I would feel comfortable saying this is a review, but I have experienced the game 4-player solo, and 2-player solo. So I'd like to share some thoughts and observations on gameplay as I've gone through that. Now, one big caveat here too, this is a prototype of the game, and as I've been watching the crowdfunding unfold, I can see there's been some new mechanics added, things like a naval element with harbors and things. There's a 3rd Crusade that's being folded in as I think is optional gameplay. Looks like leaders have been added to the game, and those things really aren't in the prototype that I've been able to experience. And so while I think I've been able to experience the core gameplay, things will change likely between now and the time the final version ships. So just something to keep in mind. Another reason why I feel a little bit not quite comfortable in saying this is a review of the game, because I think the final version will have some tweaks and adjustments to the components and then the gameplay as well. But I would like to offer up thoughts on 4-player, 2-player, and then the solitaire element of game. This surprised me quite a bit, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And so let's jump right in and get started with the 4-player experience. So 4-player Lords of Heaven. This is the game's, I think, shining sweet spot. I absolutely love this game as 4-player. And I'll talk about some of the reasons. First, there's just a fantastic sense of history. I'm a big fan of Crusader Kings 3 on the PC game, and this kind of brings this element of the Crusades of that part of the game to life. I love the artwork and the color palette of the game, and it just kind of brings you into the area. We've got Christians factions, Muslim factions, we've got Byzantine Empire, we've got the Crusaders, the Caliphate, we've got the Seljuks, and it's just sucks you into the history, and the cards bring this whole thing to life. So just this historical context within which this game sits is really special to me, and I really like the work they've done with that there. I also really like the pace of the 4-player game in a couple of ways, and I'll talk about both of them. First up, this is a short game, and I'm going to talk more about that momentarily, but not only is it a short game, it picks up the pace really fast. Some games take a while before you kind of feel like things heat up, but literally you're like 2 turns into this game and it's smoldering hot. You feel like you're right into it and you've got a critical battle coming up. The acceleration of this game is so good because you're going to be 2-3 turns in and you're like, okay, you are going at it against another faction, some battle in a key place, and it just keeps up its pace and its momentum. It picks up fast and it's got good momentum. But the other thing I like about it is, I mentioned it's a short game, and that's probably not fair because you're probably thinking, oh, it's like a 20-minute game, 30-minute game. No, 4-player game is probably 1.5 hours, 2 hours once you get used to the systems and things like that. So it's not what I would call a short game, but it is what I would call a single sitting game. And this, again, it's kind of got a feel of Wargame, crunchy Euro blend with a really nice historical context to it. And these types of games where you can sit down and learn the game and play in a single sitting, I think are just such great games, and especially a 4-player game where you can do that. It's got just a nice sweet spot of length where I think this is going to be a game where you could bring a couple of new players in, teach them the mechanics of the game, and you can play through a whole game in one evening. And I'm finding more and more I grow to appreciate these games with that sweet spot of length that's going to be about 2 hours. So, you're going to just start, it's going to heat up fast, you're going to be going at it, and then you're going to realize, wow, it's not going to be that long of a game. It feels like when you first look at things, it could be like a game that takes 4 hours, but it doesn't. It's great momentum, great pickup, and it just keeps moving along, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. So I love that element of the gameplay about it. And the gameplay itself, I think, is really good. I love the different levers you can play, using the cards well. I mean, there's a lot of different things you're trying to use well to achieve your particular goals. You've got citadels, fortresses, you've got mosques or church, you've got your military troops, different types of military troops, you've got political presence, military presence, card play, and using those cards really well can make a huge difference. If you can get a card where you can kind of trigger a double action, which if you play them well, you can do that, and that can just swing the whole thing in your favor, and then your opponent swings back. You've got alliances, so you've got this kind of political back and forth where you're negotiating with the people you're playing with trying to get them to do things. You're making bargains and deals. It's just a really, really good, outstanding 4-player experience. And I am really excited to see what the final version would look like if it's this finely tuned and this finely dialed in right now. And I think one of the elements that stands out with this is why is this so, is that it's got kind of, I wouldn't say claustrophobic, but there's not enough space to do everything you want to do. And you don't have enough resources to do everything you want to do. And you don't have enough actions to do everything you want to do. And those three elements bringing themselves together onto the gameplay means that every decision you feel like you make is a cool, fun decision and you feel like it's important. So I love games that throw meaningful decisions at you. And literally, again, like the third turn in, you're thinking, wow, this is a big decision. I should make a good decision here. And you've got a lot of different ways to solve problems, a lot of different ways to disguise your actions. It's just a really fun game. So if that's the 4-player experience, now I want to talk a little bit about the 2-player experience because, well, I think the 4-player experience is absolutely majestic. I think the 2-player experience needs some refinement. I found the 2-player experience good, but I don't find the 2-player experience as riveting yet as the 4-player experience is. And I wish I had played the 3-player experience. I think the 3-player experience probably was somewhere between the two of them here. But there's a few reasons why that I think the 2-player experience needs a little bit more refinement. And again, I also go back to the caveat that I think these things will be refined as the Kickstarter goes on, as the crowdfunding goes on, And I suspect that the 2-player experience will be refined before it hits its final version. But there's a few elements in the 2-player, because I mentioned in the 4-player game how there's not enough space and there's not enough stuff to do the things you want to do and not enough decisions. And some of that balance between space and your resources really kind of, I think, wiggles and loosens up a little bit in that 2-player experience. For example, you have 10 presence markers that you can use as each faction. You can either you can play them as political presence or military support. And when you've got 9 locations and 4 players, you've got 40 of those tokens on the board. And it's everything is important. And you're going to get kicked out of spaces and you're going to have this balance between military and political presence. But when you have 20 tokens with 2 players scattered out over 9 locations, which happens in the back half of the Crusade, it doesn't have that same kind of claustrophobic feel. And it seems to be the advantage to play those for political presence, and you kind of have a lot of room to work with. Likewise, in the 4-player game, you have 9 locations, and there can only be 12 citadels there are 12 citadels that are in play. So there's not enough room for 3 citadels. They just can't fit onto the board. So there's this sense of urgency for grabbing the spots for the citadels and the mosques and churches as well. But in the 2-player game, you've got 6 of those, and you've got 9 locations. So you've always got a space to put one down. And it just didn't feel to me like the 2-player game is as tightly wound as the 4-player experience is yet. And I think that, again, that yet is a caveat. I don't want to render, just like I wouldn't say this as a review, I don't want to render final judgment on the 2-player experience because I suspect there are more refinements to the 2-player experience to come. But as it stands right now, 4-player experience, absolutely riveting. 2-player experience, I think, is a good game. So we've talked about 4-player and we've talked about 2-player. I want to talk a little bit about the solitaire experience because I haven't heard a lot said about it yet. And I know there's a lot of viewers on the channel that like to play Wargames and Eurogames solitaire. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I did spend quite a bit of time playing it solitaire as well. And so a couple thoughts. First up, there is no bot. There is no official, mechanical bot that's going to play one side while you play the other side. So by playing this solitaire, basically what you're doing is you're switching sides and you're trying to play each side to the best of your ability. It's also important to note that the official marketing of the game is 2 to 4 player, and Phalanx isn't making any claims that this is a solitaire game. As a matter of fact, there are 2 places in the game where, as I was looking at the rules and as you start to play the game, you realize, okay, this is going to be a little bit tricky solitaire. First up is how do you handle alliances? And then the second is how do you handle combat and sieges, basically battles and sieges. And I'll talk about both of those in turn. But as I started out, I thought I wasn't really going to enjoy the solitaire experience because of those 2 reasons. Well, how am I going to be able to handle that? And it doesn't seem like it's really going to work that well. But with just a couple of adjustments, I actually grew to really, really like the 4-player solitaire experience. It's actually quite good, and I enjoy it a lot. And again, this is, you're playing one faction, then you play the next faction, you play the next faction, and then the next faction. So if you're not a gamer who does that, you won't like this. But if that's the type of game you like, and that's the type of solitaire experience you enjoy, you might find this one quite a bit better than you would anticipate by looking at the official marketing materials and kind of thinking about how the game might play. But it takes a little bit of an explanation, so I'm going to take about 5 minutes now. I just want to kind of talk through it because there are a few things I had to do to kind of get the solitaire experience to work for me. And another caveat, I've played it a couple times now, solitaire. I think I can refine on this as I go forward to make it even better. But so let's talk about the two problematic areas and why they're problematic, and then some of the solutions that I put in place to deal with each of those in the solitaire experience and to get it work to a way that I felt was really satisfying. First up, one of the problems is in the 4-player game, you can have alliances. And these are transitory, they're fast, they're shifting, and you can betray your opponents, and you just quite don't know how they're going to go. And it's a really fun part of the 4-player multiplayer experience. But in solitaire, the question is, well, how do you handle the allies? And you could say, well, okay, the ally can make the decision to the best of their ability. But I felt like it was easier for me to just put down kind of a guideline for alliances. And my guideline was this. And basically what happens in a battle is, or a siege is, if there are more than 2 factions in an area, the attacker can ask one of the other neutral parties that isn't getting attacked to say, would you like to ally with me and join this battle? And as an ally, if you're on the winning side, you get 2 victory points. That's quite a bit in a game that the victory points are going to be around 20 for the winner. Again, it's a 12 to 16 overall turn experience. So being an ally on a winning battle could be really helpful for you. So the way I handled it was, rather than kind of trying to make decisions based on what that player would think about and things like that, I just said, you have to ally. You can only ally with your religious partner unless it's to your clear advantage to do otherwise. And what that means is this: there are 2 Muslim factions in the game, and there are 2 Christian factions in the game. So if you had, a Christian faction attacking a Muslim faction, the Christian faction can ask the other Christian faction to ally with it. This faction can either say no or say yes, but it can't say yes to the Muslim faction as an ally unless it's to its clear advantage to do so. And by that would be like, it's close to the end of the game, and you can see that your Christian ally, for example, is going to win the game if it wins this battle. And yet, if it loses the battle and you could win the battle, it's going to put you in a better position to win the game. So I just played it like that, and it actually worked really, really well. It was a smooth, easy decision to make, and it just streamlined those alliances play and made it work smoothly in the game. So that took care of alliances. Let's talk a little bit about battles, because this was a little bit more of the trickier part, but I've kind of fallen into a system that I really like for handling the battles and the sieges too. Now, why are the battles and sieges problematic? Well, there are a number of elements in battles and sieges that are hidden, and you don't know what's going to happen until everybody shows what they did, and then you resolve the battle result. And there are a number of places where this goes. First up, you play a card in battle that remains hidden until the kind of the revealing time. And those cards can have a variety of strengths and effects on them, and some of them can be quite powerful. So when you can see both cards, it's a little bit problematic, because generally in the multiplayer game, you can't see the card your opponent's going to be playing. The second place is you can commit faith markers to a battle, and you don't know how many faith markers your opponent's committing to a battle either, and those add strength to your forces. Lastly, you don't know how many forces your opponent's committing to the battle, and you don't know the strength of the forces that are going to be committed to the battle. So a big part of the multiplayer combat experience is that kind of, it's almost like a poker-like bluffing, where you can say, I'm going to attack here, but maybe you're not going to attack there because you're saving your resources for a battle that's going to happen in the next turn or in the next stage of the Second Crusade part of thing. So faking out your opponent and either not committing resources or committing them in the right places and things like that can be really helpful towards getting you to victory. And the reason is as well is because faith markers are expended no matter what happens in the battle. So you commit them to a battle, you lose them. Second up, you have to pay gold to get your troops back from a battle. So it costs you gold, basically, to deploy your troops into battle. So if you can fake out your opponent and get them to commit a lot of faith resources and commit a lot of troops, but you don't, they've expended a lot of resources on a battle, they win by way too much. So basically, you're trying to just win a lot of battles. So this bluffing and commitment of resources is a big part of the multiplayer experience. And how do you handle that in solitaire? So there's one thing I found that I don't do that helped. And there are two things that I found that I did that helped make it really flow well in solitaire. First up was in the solitaire experience, I don't calculate to great depth the resources available to each side. So you can kind of pre-calculate the battle and say, okay, they get this and they get this. They're going to have like 13 points. I can have like 12 points maximum. I know this side can win. So I don't do any of that detailed math before you jump into the battle. And I just paint. The thing that I did instead was paint with a broad stroke. So I just said, okay, this force is going to commit all their resources. This force, it should be an easy battle. They're going to commit half their resources. And just do it that way. And just really simple, and then commit the resources. Don't pre-calculate, and then just see what happens. And that worked really well. And then the thing that I started adding on to make it work even better was I started thinking, okay, what could the defender or attacker conceivably do here? I could say, okay, the attacker could conceivably bluff here and commit almost nothing. Or they could commit, say, like all of their forces. That would make sense. One of those two things. And then I would just roll a die to determine what they did. A 1, 2, or 3, and they bluff. A 4, 5, or 6, and they committed everything. Likewise, I'd make that same decision for the defender. Say, okay, the defender might commit half their resources, or they might commit all of their resources because they might have a chance to win. So on a 1, 2, or 3, they commit half. On a 4, 5, or 6, they commit all. I just did that, and it worked really, really well. The whole thing flowed smoothly, and I'm like, this is a really fun experience. And once I did that, it handled those two elements that are problematic in solitaire play, the alliances and the commitment and the bluffing that's involved with combat. And it just made it flow really, really well. And I got to a point where the 4-player solitaire experience was really, really fun for me. So I wanted to share that because I know there's a lot of solitaire viewers on the channel, and they might be looking at it and saying, well, I don't think it's going to play very well solitaire. Your mileage may vary, right? As always, your mileage may vary. You do have to make some modifications to handle those things. But I found I was able to make modifications to the game, and it worked really, really well. So I liked it a lot as a solitaire experience, and I was not expecting that. There we have it. Thoughts on gameplay for Lords of Heaven. The last thing I want to say is I do think the rulebook needs some refinement, and I do think it's going to get some refinement. Again, this is a prototype, but there were a few things that I felt like could have been clarified a little better, could have been added to certain places. They seem to be off in a couple places, but that's pretty common for prototype rules. And I think that they will be refined as it goes forward. So those gaps and those omissions and things like that, I think will be tightened up, and I expect the rule set will be good. It's not a bad rule set by any means. It's just there are a number of places where like, well, it doesn't really tell you there quite what to do. So I expect those will evolve as the game is evolving into its final state from its 80 to 90% state right now into its final state as it goes through its production and things. And there you have it. Thoughts and impressions on gameplay and time spent with Lords of Heaven by Phalanx. Again, this 4-player experience is spectacular. I really like the solitaire 4-player much better than I thought I was going to. 2-player, I think, needs refinement, but I expect it will get there. Big thumbs up for me. I think this is a good one. If you like historical, crunchy Euro wargame type blends that you can play in a single sitting, I think this is something you might want to look at. And there's a lot of videos out there, so you can see a lot of other stuff too. So, do your research and things like that and make your decision. But I really have enjoyed my time with this one. I think this is going to be a great addition to the historical gaming genre when it kind of reaches production at the end of its crowdfunding stages and things like that. If you want to see some gameplay video that I've put up, I'll put a link up here to the first gameplay episode that you can take a look at. And that's a 2-part series where it plays that 2-player game all the way to completion. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you have a great day.